The valley was a secret the mountain kept. Nestled high in the jagged peaks, shielded from the scouring winds, it was a perfect, self-contained world of green. Here, Elias lived in a state of quiet penance. He was the sole resident of a small, stone cottage, its roof thick with moss, its garden a riot of impossible color. He was a hermit, a man who had divorced himself from the world of men after it had so thoroughly renounced him. He had been an architect of life, a world weaver, one of the few gifted with the ability to coax and shape ecosystems. His last project, the sunken gardens of Eridor, had been his masterpiece until the blight came. A creeping, unnatural decay that had turned his vibrant creation to gray dust and his name to a curse. Now, his only work was this small, perfect garden, a defiant spark of life in the stony heart of the world. The first sign that his solitude was about to be shattered was not a sound, but a shadow. A shadow so vast it swallowed the sun, plunging his valley into an unnatural twilight. He looked up from his work, his hand shielding his eyes, and saw them. Dragons. Not one, but a clan of at least a dozen, their scales the color of obsidian, granite, and slate, their wingspans blotting out the sky. They circled his valley once, a silent, terrifying inspection, and then they began to descend. The ground shook as the first of the colossal beasts landed, its claws gouging deep furrows in the soft earth at the edge of his garden. One by one, they followed, their immense forms arranged in a respectful, yet intimidating, circle around his small patch of civilization. They were magnificent, terrifying, and ancient beyond human comprehension. Elias stood frozen, his trowel falling from his nerveless fingers. This was not a hunt. Their posture was wrong. There was no aggression in their sharp, intelligent eyes. There was only a deep, profound, and desperate weariness. The largest of them, a matriarch whose scales were the color of cooling lava, crisscrossed with 1,000 battle scars, took a single, deliberate step forward. She lowered her massive, horned head until her great, golden eye, larger than his entire torso, was level with him. A voice, not of sound, but of thought, a voice like the grinding of tectonic plates and the whisper of ancient winds, filled his mind. "You are the last green one," the thought echoed, a statement of fact, not a question. Asterisk the last whose hands remember the song of life. We are the clan of the Obsidian Peak. And we are dying, asterisk the matriarch, whose name he would come to know as Ignis, sent him a vision. A torrent of images and feelings that showed him their ancestral lands, a vast, volcanic mountain range that had been their home for millennia. He saw them soaring on thermal updrafts, saw their young hatching from eggs like living jewels. Then, he saw the blight. It was a creeping, gray corruption that leached the color and life from everything it touched. The vibrant, volcanic earth turned to sterile, ashen dust. The hardy mountain flora crumbled. The very air grew thick with a toxic, choking despair. He saw their young hatching weak and sick, their scales dull, their fire a mere flicker. He felt their grief, their rage, their helplessness. Their own immense power, the fire that could melt stone, was useless against a plague that killed the world beneath their claws. They were titans, being brought to their knees by a silent, creeping poison. Our seers felt this place, Ignis communicated, her golden eye fixed on his vibrant, impossible garden. Asterisk a single, defiant note of life in a symphony of decay. You made this. You hold the secret to fighting the gray. We do not ask for a gift. We ask for a pact. Help us save our home, and my clan will be in your debt for 1,000 generations. Asterisk Elias, the disgraced hermit, the man who had fled the world in shame, looked at the dying embers in the great dragon's eye. His own past failure was a mirror of their present catastrophe. He had run from the blight once. He could not run again. He had no army, no great magic. He had only a small garden and a deep, painful understanding of the enemy they faced. And for a clan of dying gods, it would have to be enough. Elias agreed to their pact not with words, but with a single, slow nod. The weight of their desperation was a familiar burden. He packed a small leather satchel with sampling jars, diagnostic tools from his old life, and a few rations. He would need to see the blight for himself. Ignis designated a younger, more agile dragon named Viridian to be his guide and transport. Viridian's scales were the color of slate, and his eyes held a youthful, fiery impatience, but he treated Elias with a newfound, gentle reverence, as if he were a priceless, fragile artifact. The flight to the Blighted Lands was a journey from life to death. As they soared over the high peaks, the world below slowly transformed. The deep greens and browns of the healthy mountainside faded, giving way to patches of sickly gray. The transition was not gradual, it was a stark, unnatural line, a battlefront in a war he hadn't known was being waged. They landed at the edge of the Blight, and the moment Elias's boots touched the ground, he felt it. The earth was wrong. It was hard, calcified, and utterly sterile. The air was thin and smelled of dust and something else, a faint, metallic tang of corrupted magic. He knelt, crumbling the gray soil in his gloved hand. It had the texture of fine ash. The few remaining plants were petrified, their forms perfectly preserved but drained of all life and color, brittle husks that shattered at his touch. It was a landscape of statues, a museum of a world that had once lived. Viridian watched him, a low, frustrated rumble in his chest. "We have burned it," the young dragon communicated. We have scoured it with fire down to the bedrock. But it returns. It grows back from nothing. It is a hunger that cannot be sated. Elias walked the perimeter of the Blight, his old, analytical mind taking over. He took samples of the soil, the dead plants, the air itself. He noted the way the Blight seemed to spread, not like a fungus or a disease, but like a crystallization, a slow, inexorable transformation of matter from a living state to a dead one. It wasn't just killing the land, it was fundamentally changing its nature. He saw the dragon's nesting grounds, a vast caldera that should have been warmed by geothermal vents. Now, it was a cold, gray bowl of dust. The eggs that lay in the abandoned nests were like stones, their vibrant colors faded, their shells brittle and cold. He felt a surge of cold, professional rage. This was not a natural phenomenon. This was a perversion. He returned to his valley with the samples, the silent, grim flight a mirror of the one that had brought him there. The contrast between the gray, dead world and his own vibrant sanctuary was a physical blow. His small garden, which had once been his penance, now felt like a defiant fortress, a last bastion of life in a dying world. For 2 days, he locked himself in his small workshop, a converted shed filled with the alchemical and botanical equipment of his former trade. He analyzed the samples, peering at them through arcane lenses, subjecting them to a battery of tests that measured their magical and biological resonance. The dragons waited patiently, their massive forms dotting the slopes of his valley, silent, stoic sentinels guarding their last hope. On the evening of the 2nd day, he found it. The Blight was not a disease, it was a spell, a piece of deeply corrupted, artificial magic. It was a complex magical algorithm that targeted the very essence of life, the anima that flowed through all living things, and inverted it. It was a weapon. And as he isolated the magical signature, a cold dread washed over him. He recognized it. It was a twisted, weaponized version of the same world-weaving magic he practiced. The energy patterns, the resonant frequencies, they were a dark mirror of his own art. The Blight that had destroyed the sunken gardens of Eridor, the one he had been blamed for, had been a weaker, cruder version of this same plague. His failure hadn't been an accident. It had been an attack. And he, in his shame and exile, had allowed the true culprit to continue their work, to refine their terrible weapon, to unleash it upon the world on a scale he could never have imagined. His disgrace, his solitude, his grief, it had all been built on a lie. And that lie was now poisoning the world and killing the last of its dragons. The unimaginable thing was not that the dragons had come to him for help. It was that he was the only person in the world who truly understood the nature of the enemy they faced. Elias emerged from his workshop, his face grim, the weight of his discovery heavy on his shoulders. He walked to the center of his garden, where Ignis, the great matriarch, rested, her massive form coiled around a small, warm spring. The other dragons watched from a distance, their golden eyes tracking his every move. He did not need to speak. He opened his mind and shared what he had found. He showed Ignis the magical signature of the blight, the twisted, artificial code of the spell. He showed her its nature as a weapon. And then, he showed her his own memories, the vibrant beauty of the sunken gardens of Eridor, the first, subtle appearance of the gray decay, his frantic, failed attempts to stop it, and the accusing faces of the council that had exiled him. He shared his shame, his guilt, and now, his dawning, terrible understanding. The blight that broke you is the same that now breaks us, Ignis communicated, her ancient mind processing the revelation with a deep, sorrowful wisdom. You did not fail, World Weaver. You were the first victim of a war you did not know was being waged. A burden Elias had carried for 20 years began to lift. He was not a failure. He had been a casualty. But there was no time for relief. The truth only made their situation more dire. This was not a natural disaster to be weathered, it was an enemy to be fought. But how? We will find the source, Viridian's fiery thoughts cut in. We will find the caster of this spell and burn them from the world. You can't, Elias said, speaking aloud for the first time, his voice rough from disuse. The spell isn't anchored to a single person. It's been woven into the fabric of the land itself. It's a self-replicating magical virus. Killing its creator, even if you could find them, would not stop it now. Then what do we do? Ignis asked, her mind a chorus of her clan's despair. My seers have searched for a new home, a new mountain to nest in. But the blight is spreading faster than we can fly. There is nowhere to run, no, Elias agreed, his gaze sweeping over his small, perfect garden. There is nowhere to run. So we must stand and fight. Not with fire. Not with claws. We must fight this death with an overwhelming abundance of life. He began to outline his plan, a plan so audacious, so contrary to every instinct of the powerful, direct-minded dragons, that they listened in stunned silence. He would not create a new valley for them. He would not build a magical wall to hold back the blight. He would use his own garden, this tiny, perfect jewel of life, as a seed. He would pour his own life essence, his own world weaver anima, into the very heart of the valley and unleash a wave of creation, a tsunami of pure, concentrated life force that would wash over the mountain and rewrite the blight's code of death. It was a plan born of desperation and a profound understanding of his art. It was also, he knew, a plan that would almost certainly kill him. To channel that much life force would require him to become a living conduit, to burn his own soul as fuel. The dragons were silent for a long moment, the scale of his proposed sacrifice beyond their comprehension. They were beings of immense power, but their power was their own, something to be held and wielded. This human was proposing to spend his very life force, to burn himself out completely, for them, for a world that had cast him aside. You would do this? Ignis asked, her ancient mind humbled. You would give your life? Elias looked at the small, stone cottage that had been his home and his prison. He looked at the vibrant, impossible flowers that were his only legacy. He had come here to die, a man forgotten by the world. But now, he had a chance to save it. His death would have meaning. I started this garden to prove to myself that there was still beauty in the world, he said softly. Now, it's time to share it. The dragons, humbled and awestruck, accepted his plan. There was no other choice. They became the silent, solemn guardians of his final work. Elias began his preparations, a slow, methodical ritual that was both deeply scientific and profoundly magical. He moved through his garden, his sanctuary, not as its master, but as its humble servant. He gathered seeds from the sunstone roses, whose petals glowed with the warmth of captured daylight. He collected spores from the moon-thread fungi, which wove the very light of the stars into their mycelial network. He harvested leaves from the ironwood trees, whose roots drew strength from the mountain's granite heart. Each element was a note in the symphony of life he was about to conduct. He spent a day grinding the seeds and spores into a fine, glittering powder, mixing them with purified water from his spring and a single drop of his own blood. This was the catalyst, the physical anchor for the magic he was about to unleash. The dragons watched him, their fiery impatience replaced by a quiet, somber reverence. They saw not a frail human, but a master craftsman at his forge, preparing for his final, greatest creation. While he worked, Ignis, the matriarch, shared with him more of her clan's history, a gift of memory in exchange for his gift of life. He saw the world as it was in the beginning, a raw, chaotic canvas of fire and stone. He saw the first dragons, born from the planet's molten heart, beings of immense power who had shaped the very mountains with their fire. He learned of their ancient pact with the earth, their role as guardians of the high places. He felt their deep, abiding connection to the world, a connection the blight was now severing, a loss that was more painful to them than any physical wound. As he listened to their story, Elias began to weave their essence into his ritual. He was not just saving the land for them, he was weaving them back into the land. He asked Viridian for a single, shed scale. The young dragon obliged, offering a piece of his own slate-gray armor. Elias ground it into his mixture, adding the dragon's resilience, their connection to fire and stone, to his spell of life. The final preparation was the creation of the circle. In the center of his garden, he drew a series of complex, interlocking runes, lines of power that he traced on the earth with the powdered catalyst. The runes glowed with a soft, golden light, a circuit diagram for a miracle. It was a map of life itself, from the smallest microbe to the mightiest dragon. As he completed the circle, a tremor ran through the mountain. A scout dragon returned, its thoughts a wave of panic. The blight had sensed their purpose. It was accelerating. A tide of gray corruption was surging up the mountainside, devouring everything in its path, a silent, inexorable army of death marching on their last sanctuary. They had hours, not days. There was no more time for preparation. The final act had to begin now. Elias walked to the center of the glowing circle of runes. He looked up at the great, silent forms of the dragons, their jewel-like eyes filled with a mixture of fear and hope. He had come to this mountain a broken man, seeking an ending. Now, he stood as a king in his own small kingdom, ready to give his life to defend it. He knelt, placing his hands flat on the earth in the center of the circle. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and let go. He released his own life force, his anima, his soul, into the earth, a willing sacrifice to fuel the great spell. He was no longer Elias, the man. He was becoming a part of the song of creation itself. The final battle for the soul of the mountain had begun. The moment Elias released his life force into the earth, the garden screamed with silent, explosive life. The glowing runes of the circle flared with a light so bright it was like a new sun had been born in the valley. A wave of pure, green, vibrant energy erupted outwards, not a wave of destruction, but a tsunami of pure, unadulterated creation. The dragons, caught by surprise by the sheer scale of the power being unleashed, were forced to take to the air, their massive forms buffeted by the winds of life that swirled from the valley. From their vantage point in the sky, they witnessed a miracle. The wave of green energy washed down the mountainside, meeting the advancing tide of gray, sterile blight. It was not a collision of opposing forces. The life wave did not destroy the blight, it consumed it, healed it, rewrote its code of death. Where the two waves met, the calcified, ashen ground did not shatter, it softened, darkened, and became rich, fertile soil. The petrified husks of dead trees did not crumble, they were rejuvenated, their gray bark flushing with green, new leaves bursting from their dead branches in an impossible, instantaneous spring. The toxic air was cleansed, replaced by the sweet scent of damp earth and blooming flowers. The dragons watched, their ancient, cynical hearts filled with an awe they had not felt in millennia. They, who could melt mountains with their breath, were witnessing a power far greater than their own. Not the power to destroy, but the power to create. The power to heal. The wave of life continued to spread, a circle of rejuvenation expanding outwards for miles, reclaiming the blighted lands. Rivers that had run dry began to flow again with pure, clean water. Wildlife that had fled the corruption began to return, drawn by the scent of a world reborn. The dragon's ancestral nesting grounds in the great caldera, which had been a cold bowl of dust, now steamed with renewed geothermal energy, its floor covered in a carpet of soft, new moss. At the center of it all, Elias was burning out. He was a living conduit for a torrent of creation magic, and it was consuming him. Through their shared mental connection, Ignis could feel his life force fading, his consciousness dissolving into the great spell he had unleashed. He was dying, his soul becoming the song of the renewed earth. She could not let it happen. His sacrifice had saved them, but his wisdom, his unique understanding of the world, was too precious to lose. She gave a great, silent cry to her clan, a command that resonated in their very bones. They descended from the sky, a circle of living mountains, and landed around the periphery of the still-glowing garden. They would not interfere with the spell, but they would not let its caster perish. They opened their mouths, and together, they breathed not fire, but a different kind of energy. It was the fire of their own life force, their ancient, primal connection to the planet's molten heart. They breathed it not at Elias, but into the earth around him, a gift of their own immense vitality, an offering to replenish the life that he was so freely spending. It was an act of faith, a pact sealed not in words, but in a shared sacrifice. The dragon who had been saved by the man now sought to save him in turn. The cycle of life, broken by the blight, was being restored in more ways than one. The influx of the dragon's ancient, fiery life force did not stop the spell, but it changed it. It fed the wave of creation, giving it a new, wild, and untamable power. The green tide of life exploded outwards, not just healing the mountain, but reshaping it. New peaks rose, crystalline veins of quartz and emerald breaking the surface. Waterfalls of impossible size and beauty began to cascade down the newly formed cliffs. The land was not just being restored, it was being reborn as something more, a fusion of Elias's gentle, cultivated magic and the dragon's raw, primal power. In the center of the vortex, Elias felt the tide of his own life turn. The dragon's energy flowed into him through the earth, a warm, grounding force that anchored his fading consciousness. He was no longer just a conduit, spending his soul. He was a part of a circuit, a bridge between the gentle magic of the green earth and the fierce magic of its molten heart. The blight, unable to withstand this overwhelming onslaught of pure, balanced life, was not just pushed back, it was unraveled. Its corrupted magical code was overwritten, its sterile, gray essence cleansed and returned to the great cycle of creation. The war was over. As the sun began to rise, the wave of energy subsided. The mountain was silent, clothed in a new, vibrant, and miraculous ecosystem. The dragon's ancestral home was not just restored, it was now a sanctuary, a place of power unlike any other on the planet. The open wound on the world had been healed. Elias collapsed, his body finally succumbing to the immense strain. He was not dead, but he was utterly spent, a flickering candle in the dawn of the new world he had created. Ignis, the great matriarch, landed beside him. With a gentleness that belied her immense size, she nudged him with her great, horned snout. He was alive, his breathing shallow but steady. The man who had been prepared to give everything had been saved by the very beings he had sought to rescue. The deep, ingrained shame of Elias's past, the failure at Eridor, was gone, washed away by the tide of creation he had unleashed. The blight had not been his fault. It had been his destiny to confront it, not as a lone, disgraced exile, but as an ally to the oldest and most powerful beings in the world. He had found his redemption, not in forgiveness from the world of men, but in the gratitude of dragons. They had come to him for aid, a clan of dying gods seeking a miracle from a lone man. And what he had done next was truly unimaginable. He had not just saved them. He had reminded them of a power they had long forgotten, that the greatest strength is not in the fire that destroys, but in the life that endures, adapts, and, against all odds, grows. The dragons carried Elias to their most sacred place, a hidden, steaming grotto deep within the heart of the reclaimed mountain. The waters of the hot spring were rich with the earth's own vitality, and as they bathed him in the life-giving warmth, they shared with him more of their own essence, a slow, gentle transfusion of their ancient strength. He slept for 3 days, and in his sleep, he dreamed. He dreamed of the world through the dragon's eyes, feeling the slow, deep rhythms of the planet, the pull of the moons, the warmth of the sun on ancient scales. When he awoke, he was changed. The lines of grief and shame on his face were gone, replaced by a quiet, deep-set wisdom. He was no longer a hermit, but a part of the mountain, a part of the clan. In the weeks that followed, a new and profound partnership was forged. Elias, with his intricate knowledge of life's delicate tapestry, and the dragons, with their immense, primal power, began to work together. He taught them the subtle art of cultivation, of nurturing the new world he had created. They, in turn, shared with him their ancient secrets, the deep magic of fire and stone. He was no longer in exile, he was the world healer, the first human in 1,000 generations to be called friend by the Dragon Clan. He did not return to his small cottage. His garden had become the heart of the entire mountain, its essence spread across 1,000 square miles. His new home was among the dragons, in the warm, living heart of the world he had helped to remake. They knew their fight was not over. The blight was a weapon, and its creator was still out there. Its retreat was not a defeat, but a temporary setback. Now, however, they had a new strategy. They would not wait for the blight to return. They would proactively spread the vibrant, resilient life of their new sanctuary, creating a world so strong, so healthy, that the sterile corruption of the blight could find no purchase. It was a slow, patient, and hopeful form of warfare. One evening, as Elias stood with Ignis on the highest peak of their new home, looking out at the world that glowed with a new, magical vitality, he finally felt at peace. He had spent half his life in a prison of his own shame, believing he was a bringer of death. The dragons had shown him the truth. His gift was, and always had been, for life. He had been a gardener, waiting for the right soil. The world sings a new song, Ignis communicated, her thoughts a warm, rumbling harmony. You are its composer, Elias. Elias smiled, the setting sun glinting off the scales of the dragons soaring in the valley below. No, he thought back, his mind now a clear, strong note in the planet's chorus. I was just a conductor. The music was here all along. The lone man had been asked for aid, and in answering the call, he had not just saved a clan of dragons, he had found his own salvation. He had learned that even the most broken soul could be healed, and that the most unimaginable acts are born not of great power, but of a simple, stubborn, and unwavering love for the world.